welcome to our channel, where we set out to explore wonderful, great works of literature.
While dressed in elegant clothing, because
Why the hell not? So if you viewed our earlier intro, you can see that we are not at home.
No.
Where are we?
We're in a little stone cottage, actually my family home.
By a lake.
By a lake in northern Ontario.
Yeah. So this is Easter weekend, and we thought it was quite fitting to cover a very Christ-like figure in Prince Mishkin in The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And one of our viewers actually put in a request to have us cover some Russian literature. And I believe this is your first time reading Dostoevsky.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my second run through. And I think the genre of this type of book is known as like a philosophical novel. And in many ways, I think we can touch on certain aspects of this novel without necessarily being worried about spoilers. Because this is one of those types of novels that you could actually read essays and critiques and books of analysis on it, having not read any portion of the book, and still find something good to glean from it when you read it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like there's much of a necessary a plot per se in like a traditional sense of like, you know, there's this, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a traditional novel in that sense.
There's not a lot of moving scenes, is there?
Yeah. And so this novel was written, it has a very odd structure. In fact, I think that's one of the criticisms of the novel. It was almost like a stream of consciousness. What Dostoevsky really did, in a sense, was he had certain ideas and he wanted to test these ideas. And what he would do is he would take certain characters and their own temperaments and dispositions, and then he'd throw them in with all these other types of characters, and he kind of let the characters interact with one another and see, almost like an experiment to see how they would, what the outcome would be, how they'd interact with one another, and he tests like philosophical arguments,
Mm-hmm.
you know, against these characters.
Yeah.
So
do you want to talk a little bit about Dostoevsky?
Yeah, I guess like what I was saying was I guess we could have like a whole other documentary on Dostoevsky because he had really quite an intense life. But he was born Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky in Moscow in 1821, and he was the second of a physician's 7 children. What else we can say? So he's known for Crime and Punishment. He's known for Demons. He's known for the Brothers Karamazov. All like top-notch, like considered part of the canon in terms of classic literature. But this one here was actually rather autobiographical in a sense. I think it was a more personal touch for Dostoevsky because Prince Mishkin is an epileptic, and so it was Dostoevsky. And a lot of his sort of religious, spiritual, political, philosophical ideas are embedded in this novel. So even though it's not his most, it's still well known, but I don't think it's his most successful novel necessarily. But it is one of his favorites, I'd say. I think he did comment on that. So so about the spoilers, I guess we're okay with spoilers at this point. But you wanted to talk about one of the characters, Nastasia Philippovna.
Yeah, and do you want to talk about the main character?
Yeah, Prince Mishkin.
Yeah, why don't you start with...
You want me to start?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I guess so. Prince Mishkin arrives to this sort of rural town, I suppose, but through train, having just left a sanatorium in Switzerland, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
He had some sort of epileptic fits and almost like, I would say, mentally sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And emotionally sensitive.
Well, he was recovering, basically.
Yeah, he was recovering.
And I think he was... Did they say he was mute for a while? Like, he just didn't speak for a long time.
Perhaps.
But I wonder, in hindsight, I wonder if that was his choice, not necessarily a result of the epilepsy, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it was probably his choice.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, in this basic premise, one of the things it says here, in Prince Mishkin, Dostoevsky portrays the purity of a truly beautiful soul. And this is something that kind of recurs throughout when Dostoevsky is talking to the other publishers and other fellow writers in these correspondences, is that's what he wanted to convey, a truly beautiful soul. And there's this quote from Mishkin where, you know, beauty will save the world. And it kind of goes in with the aesthetic as well, Dostoevsky's own theory of aesthetics, but it also goes to this sort of this understanding of the holy fool and Prince Mishkin as almost like a Christ-like figure, this pure, innocent soul that is kind of like propelled into the greedy, sort of like very cynical, very nihilistic Russian society of the time. And
when was the time supposed to be again?
this was supposed to be late 19th century, mid 19th century. Yeah.
I do feel like he was a good Christ-like figure. Like, what were your sentiments when you went?
That's a good question. Here's the thing. I think my immediate reaction when I first read it was aversion, and I think yours was a similar one as well. Maybe you can talk about it later on, but there was something annoying about Prince Mishkin and his inability to really assert himself in the world or call people out in a more upfront way. He does that, but almost through a naive innocence, through his own purity, he kind of like redeems the world of corruption. And even with your character,
Nastasia?
yeah,
Nastasia.
Nastasia. So really, even with her own cynicism and her own like sort of self-destructiveness and her own sense of like self-hatred, even his bizarre reactions, the fact that he won't react like other men of her social circle or her time, kind of like unsettles her. And through his own purity and his own kind of like detachment in a way from the ambitions and the greed and sort of like the pettiness of the people that they're surrounded with, he's this very unsettling figure. And I think my initial annoyance at him is precisely because of that, because in a sense he represents an archetype. And there's always something unearthly about an archetype. There's always something alien about it. And, you know, my immediate reaction, your immediate reaction, is a result of our already being part of that type of society where we are, you know, it's tit for tat, it's revenge, it's jealousy, it's madness, it's all these different things. But when somebody seems to be beyond that or above that, or not necessarily even very much into it and affected by it and reactive to it, there's some quality to them that's almost like outside of the norm.
Yeah, so I felt the part that frustrated me about him was that he seemed... Sorry, were you done?
No, yeah.
Okay. To me, he seemed like, from the outside, it seemed like a bleeding heart. Like, he was always rescuing people who maybe needed to learn a lesson, is what frustrated me at his own expense. Like, there was no... I think I interpreted it as... From my own experience, like, I interpreted it as I was worried about him sacrificing himself and his own soul, which I guess is a Christ-like figure, right? But almost to the point where he didn't care if his suffering was profound in the process. And that was the part that frustrated me, was like, you rescue people who maybe aren't worthy of it. You know, like, some people were worthy of it and needed a chance, but it was almost like he didn't care whether you were worthy of it or not. He stepped in when it was morally right to step in, you know, regardless of any past sin you had, like, whatever the gossip was, whatever, it didn't matter. He rescued everyone.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the universalism of the Christ figure, right? But another thing was, it's like, even the idea of the holy fool, one thing I kind of maybe... So Dostoevsky and some of his also critics agreed together that he was unsuccessful in portraying a purely Christ-like figure. And in fact, it's been argued, there's this great book called Dostoevsky the Thinker, which I read a while ago, and it gives you a philosophical sort of outline of all of his ideas through his characters and his stories. But in that book, the scholar, the professor, was saying how later on in this in his output, he wrote something called The Adolescent, a book called The Adolescent, and there's a character called Dolgoruki in that book, and that is more of an accurate portrayal of that Christ-like figure that he was trying, a purely beautiful soul that he was trying to capture here, right? But the thing is, what I want to say about the holy fool is that the holy fool, in a way, does things that are completely bizarre and outrageous. So outrageous that kind of they break every norm of a society, every norm of a town, every norm of a city, so that they almost become like this weird outcast, this weird, disheveled, uncouth type person. But it's precisely that uncouthness and precisely that almost it's not amoral, but it's almost like non-moral, a non-moral type person who's not bound by the moral restrictions of the society in which they live, or the kind of like always on the fringes of that society as well. But this Mishkin wasn't like that. He didn't do anything outrageous. In fact, like he was more kind of like the Christ of the Gospels, in the sense like, he kind of followed, he was incredibly moral in a very pure manner, but the holy fool is almost like the one who upturns the order, the moral order, to show that there's something beyond the moral order. There's a transcendent function beyond the moral order, right?
Yeah, I think that was the piece that was missing, is he wasn't wise.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be the holy idiot and still have wisdom. It's that the populace doesn't see you as wise.
Right.
They're so caught up in their own drama and society expectation that they refuse to see the wisdom behind the action, right?
Yeah.
But I felt like he really was a child. Like his innocence was childlike.
And that's kind of what
in the sense that he didn't even necessarily see the evil act that was happening. He was like too forgiving of evil acts, maybe not too forgiving, but he didn't even seem to see the evil.
Right. He always saw the good side of them, right?
Yeah, always the
redemptive side.
Which I feel like that should be part of a Christ-like figure, but I don't think they should be so naive. Like he was truly naive too. And that I found that hard. I found that a bit frustrating.
And I think that's the core of it, because even on a theological level, like Dostoevsky was a Russian Orthodox Christian, but even on a theological level, I guess my sympathies are more like Gnostic. But there are apocryphal portions of the Bible where Jesus actually there's a darker side. There's a side that understands the evil, right?
Yeah.
And this one is trying to depict too much of the one side, light, good, pure beauty.
Right. Because can you really see beauty if you don't see evil?
Right.
That's the piece that I think was missing.
And
you have to be aware of both.
And that's like a Gnostic.
But there was a lot lost on me in this novel, so maybe it did exist and I didn't see it.
I would say no. I think a lot of it was based on his own religious and philosophical sort of motives and his thought. But that being said, like there is a lot that's even lost. Like I think that we both, this would take multiple readings and a whole lifetime of studying to get all the intricacies of it. Which is why I wanted to read that other book, Dostoevsky, The Thinker, because it actually illuminates some portions that would be rather frustrating to read. Some of the dialogue, you're like, why are these people so motivated by sort of hatred and cynicism? But maybe that can lead you on to your character.
Why do I keep forgetting?
Nastasia.
Yeah. I don't know why I keep wanting to
Philippovna.
Nastasia. Anyway, I found her character, like, while I was reading it, I found it frustrating. And then when I read some other analysis, then I was like, oh, that makes so much more sense. And I didn't understand her, like, haughtiness and why she was so like quick to temper and spiteful.
And that's like something that's a theme, is Loy, it's called in Russian. There's a lot of that in Russian.
And there was some, like, in the beginning, I guess it was also just the time you didn't really have to spell out so much of what was happening, but basically her innocence is stolen from her through a man who had no intention of marrying her. Totsky. And after that, she was, like, kind of broken inside.
Yeah.
And that went over my head. Like, I kind of thought that there was something going on, but I didn't realize it was to the extent it was. And there's a lot of, like, reading between the lines that you have, like, if you read, I think that was the problem, is maybe we read it too quickly for me to sit with it a bit longer and understand what the character's motives were. But in the end, after the analysis of it, I have a lot of respect for her character, that it really showed someone who was broken, and her actions of spite and taunting
and erratic behavior.
Erratic was all a result of self-hatred
Yeah.
after being a victim of something awful.
Yeah.
And continuing to be a victim of something awful, sold to men basically.
Yeah.
As if she was just this object that could be bought.
Yeah.
And she resisted that rather than being, unlike the women in white, where Laura was kind of this not cowardly character, but very timid character, meek character who just kind of drowned in that sorrow and gave in to the fate of, and didn't really stand up to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was, she just kind of followed society's expectation. She didn't try to rebel against it, whereas Nastasia did. And even though it, in a way, made her seem more of a fallen woman or more crazed, in a way, her crazed action was more human, right? To like fight for your own dignity. And all she ever wanted was men to treat her with the intelligence and respect that she felt she deserved. And then in the end, because she had been so disrespected so many times, she, you know, she lost her own self-respect and went mad.
Yeah. And like one of the things, I guess we touched upon it earlier, but like Prince Mishkin was one of those characters who said, you know, almost above all, like, you are forgiven. You're forgiven for everything that you've gone through, despite all the horrible things that you've put other people through and they've put onto you. Like, you are relieved of that things. Like, you know, it's, you know, you've been absolved of all of that. And I think that moment she even got angry with Mishkin, Prince Mishkin, because she couldn't even bring herself. But it was like a relief, and at the same time, incredible, like, you know, it's really questioning.
It was too much for her, like, to accept that amount of gratitude for something she felt, I think she couldn't reciprocate, right? People want to also reciprocate. They don't want charity. Yeah. And I think it was that. It was like, she's like, why, like, at what cost is this? And so in her head, it's like, everyone else has used me for something. You know, why should I trust this man? Yeah. Like, at one point, her heart's melting about it, and she's in love with this man who's so profoundly giving. Yeah. And then and forgiving. And then on the other hand, she's like, no, there has to be another motive. And I think she kind of goes crazy. But I think that's absolutely brilliant about Dostoevsky, is that he has such nuanced characters, like so nuanced that, like, I think it was a quote from Einstein where he said, you know, if I want to learn about human psychology, I don't go through any textbook. I read Dostoevsky, right? And I think that's absolutely spot on. Yeah. And I think like that, the idiots, like Mishkin's love for this fallen woman was very similar to Razor's Edge character. Where he again tries to rescue this, and that was his like sole purpose, really, he felt, was to rescue this fallen woman who also refused to be rescued, right? Yeah. And, you know, and it was similar situation where the two women had gone through something tragic, and they couldn't forgive themselves for it, right? And in Razor's Edge, it was she couldn't forgive herself for her character's name, but she couldn't forgive herself for the death of her husband and child. And she was so caught up in her grievance, and then became an opium addict, basically, right? Oh, yeah. Or an alcoholic, opium or alcoholic, I can't remember. And then here, she's almost addicted to revenge. It's like she can't give up. The hatred and anger she has is burning too strong inside of her to then just be forgiven. Yeah, and like one of the other, she has like a number of suitors throughout the novel, and one of the suitors' name is Rogozhin, and he's like this very violent, aggressive, possessive man, and in the end, she kind of gives herself to him, knowing full well that means her death. Yeah, and both do that. Like both of the female characters in both books kind of give in to their. It's almost like they wanted to just be reborn again. They needed to die to be reborn again, right? They couldn't just erase all. Right, but they couldn't almost erase all the things they've been through. Yeah, you know. Yeah. It was in a different way. They were really suicidal. Like they had given up on the good in life. It's like the self-destructive aspect. Yeah, absolutely. The thanatos, the urge to death, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I wish I had read it slowly and wasn't so impatient with it. Well, having read it a second time, you start to pick up other things that are like more nuanced and subtle. But it's a wonderful book. Very much recommend it. But it definitely takes a good sit down. Yeah. Yeah. So should we? And be patient with the idiot. Be patient with him. Yeah. And Nastasia.
Nastasia.
Nastasia. Dang it! Why can't I get her name right? Russian names.
Did you want to rate it?
I'm gonna get you to.
Okay. I rate it a 4.1. I think all of Dostoevsky's novels are probably like 4 and above. This one be on the lower level just because I don't enjoy the structure. There isn't much of a structure. One of the characters was Hippolyte. I think he was fabulous. I think he really redeemed this book as well, where he's like the most like nihilistic character around. He was annoying. He was annoying. He was kind of like this very sort of like dramatic young man who knows he's going to die, and he's just like completely like against the entire world, but he's like kind of like an argument against God, I guess, or whatever. But that was powerful. Like he definitely gives voices to his like unsavory characters. He definitely gives them great voices, right? So 4.1, but I do like his other books like Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment, Demons, I really liked as well. So
maybe we'll have to do some of those.
Maybe those ones. Okay, and then
so before I figured out what, and I have like 2 ratings.
Okay.
One, when I first read it, I would have given it a 3.5.
Right.
And then after sitting on it and mulling it over and reading more about it, I really like the characters actually in the end.
Yeah.
Even though they frustrated me, now I understand how philosophical it was. Before I was just like, why is everyone so annoying?
Yeah.
Now I understand it, so now I would give it like a 4.3.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, beat me. You beat me. Very good.
Yeah.
All right.
That's just because I'm competitive.
Yeah. Well, happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
And if you Orthodox Easter, it'll be next month. But we hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to.
And for Brazilian fans, next we have one for you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, stay tuned.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon.